So it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Xavier Hinaut. So Xavier Hinaut is a research scientist in computational neuroscience since 2016 at India, Bordeaux, France. He received an MSc in computer science in 2008 from UTC Compiègne, France, and MSc in cognitive science and AI in 2009 at EPHE Paris. He received a PhD in computational neuroscience from the University of Lyon in 2013. His work is at the frontier of neurosciences, machine learning, robotics, songbirds, and linguistics, from modeling of human sentence processing to the analysis of bird songs and their neural correlates. He manages the Deep Pool ANR project on human sentence modeling with reservoirs. He leads Reservoir PY development, a new Python library for reservoir computing. Thank you very much. Over to you, Xavier.
Thank you very much, Sonny, for the nice introduction. Yeah, just to know, if you want to record, it's fine for me. And okay, so yeah, I will present you Reservoir Smile. So that's kind of a very long-term project, and it's toward the SensoriMotor interaction of language and embodiment of symbol with reservoir architectures. So I will first introduce a bit the topic, then show you some contributions, and then discuss a bit about this. So the big idea I want to answer is how do we learn to understand and produce sentences? So as I'm a computer scientist, my aim is to make a neuro-computational model of language processing and production. And I'm interested in particular in several features of language, so it doesn't count all features like social and interaction and so on, but it has interesting features like dynamic. The model should be dynamic anytime. It should be robust to noise, hierarchical, grounded, incremental, let symbol emerge, and use action perception mechanism. So we'll come into detail in all these features because it's a lot. And just so you can follow when they are present and when they are not present, when I have a slide. So I will write it in full when they are present, and just in the acronym when they are not present, like this. Okay, so I hope you will be able to listen to my audio. So let me know if you hear the sound. So the idea is that you should try to remember for a long time the first one. So I will test your ability to check this. So let me know if you hear it. Did you hear it or not?
No, I'm not able to hear it. Cyan, can you hear this?
Okay.
No, sir, it's not quite audible. So when you actually present, sir, there's an option to check for sound.
Okay. Yes, but I have to go back to, okay. Maybe, yeah, without the sharing, it's faster. Okay. What's this option? Yeah, I know there's an option somewhere, but there's a lot of options.
Maybe Rohan, if it is possible to show how to do it.
Oh, yes, sir. So once you click on share screen,
put my microphone on. It's amazing because it's easier. Okay.
sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Maybe you can share your screen, Rohan, and show how to do it. That will be quicker.
So the share screen option doesn't come while you're presenting it, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So are you able to?
When I talk to you, I hope you understand me well.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
It
we can
works
hear
now.
you.
Are you able to?
Yeah.
Did you hear it?
Yeah, yes. Something happened. It worked.
Hmm. Did you hear the sound?
Yeah, yes. It worked.
Okay. So you have to remember this one. Then try to reproduce, to imitate this one.
Dlaczego kapelusz miałby być przerażający?
So obviously, I guess it's less easy because you don't speak Polish, or unless some of you speak Polish, but the English one was much easier. And then the last one is this one.
We can't hear this.
So that's even harder because it's not even human sounds. So it's yeah, very difficult to reproduce. And I'm sure I could ask one of you to repeat this, the first one. Even if you hear it 1 minute ago, you're able to maybe remember the idea because you understand it. And so the idea is that here you can see the different sounds. So actually from this spectrogram, so which is the time and frequency representation of the sound, you don't know which of them you can recognize. And this one you can see that maybe Birdsong is not going to work so well. Okay, so what are the different strategies to remember and imitate the sounds I played? So first, you can imitate the sound by heart. And so how are you able to imitate this continuous flow of sounds? Well, first, you take these sounds, you perceive them first, and then you try to have a representation of this, to find from the perception you have to a motor gesture, so to produce them, and then to produce, so to create a new sound. And this is interesting because it's create a loop with the environment, which is actually able to train you to train again and again. Which means that actually, if you train like this, you can actually evaluate yourself, your production, and imitate better and better. And that's interesting because here we have the robustness because we have to deal with the environment. The model is incremental because we can do it by trial and error. And you have this perception action features, which because you are linking this perception and action features. Okay, so an intermediate quick summary. So we have this, what you showed previously, it's a kind of SensoriMotor model. And for this SensoriMotor model, we need to adapt its gesture to imitate sounds. So to have perception that shapes action, to use non-gesture to recognize sounds. So it means that actions shape perception. And so it means that we will have perception action symbols or perceptual motor symbols, not just symbols for perception and symbols for action. And the model can interact with the environment with the production of real sounds in a robust fashion. And as I said, the model learns incrementally. So in order to imitate by heart the full stream of sound, you have to remember the full stream, and the problem is that actually our working memory is limited. So actually you can only remember from 4 to 7 elements. So how could we deal with a long sequence of sound if you can only remember a few elements? Well, you can find a way to group information. That's the second strategy. So you can actually cut the stream of sounds in different parts, for instance, the phonemes. But the problem is that your working memory will be also limited to few phonemes. So you will not be able to remember a lot of them. But we know that language is hierarchical. So it goes from speech, sounds to phoneme, words, sentences, meaning of sentences, and meaning of the discourse. And so actually we will take this into account to actually make this different level of chunks. So the idea is, so a chunk is a group of elements that occurs often together and that can be grouped as new elements. And so the idea is that you have this SensoriMotor model interacting with the environment, and then you will make this hierarchically in order to make hierarchical chunks from bigger and bigger chunks containing more and more information. And so this is the idea of chunk and pass from Christensen and Chatter. So the idea is to record the input as chunk as soon as possible and to pass it to the upper layer and to capture the key elements in the sensory information, so to abstract the inputs rather than doing just predictions. So a sequence of chunk at one level will be recorded as a single chunk at a higher level. So the summary for this grouping element part is that we have working memory limitations given an abstraction level. And so we need to dynamically chunk a continuous and noisy stream of sounds to represent different levels of symbols that are organized hierarchically, and to have this symbol that emerge during language acquisitions. So in this way, it can be robust to actually any language. Okay, so and the last strategy that you can do to remember and imitate the sounds I played is actually to understand once the full sentence. So you will be able to actually be able to reproduce it very, very close to it. And so to understand it, what you need is to actually link these perceptual motor symbols, so which are just symbols linked to perception or actions of the sounds, to other modalities like vision, proprioception, and so on. That means that you have to ground these perceptual motor symbols. So for example, you have this idea of a pipe, you have this objective in the real world. So you have this pronunciation of pipe or the written version of it. And then you have all the mental association linked to this object. So the smell, the taste, the actions you can do with it, and so on. And so, yeah, we don't need, understanding language is not just to process just sounds, but written version of it, but also to link it to different meanings. And so for this, we'll take back the hierarchy that we saw before, and we link it to different other modalities using robots. So for this last strategy, you need to understand, you need perceptual motor symbols that can emerge, to ground them with other modalities, and to do this at different levels of hierarchy. Okay, so now that we have these 7 features, which kind of architecture are we going to use? And so I'm not going to go into details of different interesting architecture that exists, because I don't have time, but I will show you the ones that I'm using, which is reservoir computing. So I guess most of you know how reservoir computing works. So you connect randomly the first layer to a recurrent layer, which is also random. And then you have another layer, a last layer for the output, which actually will be trained. And then you give the input, for example, the bike is blue, so as a sequence of words, and you see the working memory inside the recurrent network, which is encoded in a sequence. And then, so a simplistic way to learn it would be a bit similar to this. So you activate the person who said the sentence, and then you just reinforce the connection between the active neuron here and the active neuron in the reservoir and active neuron outside. So the idea of reservoir computing is what I like it, because you have this dynamic inputs and dynamic insights. So you really have a model that can process continuous flows. And it's interesting for brain modeling because you actually don't unfold time like in other recurrent neural network algorithms like backpropagation through time. And for me, so the randomness can be seen as kind of a problem usually, but so people tend to not have difficulties to agree with this idea of reservoir computing because it seems that randomness is not so intelligent or not so smart, but actually it's just that you have no prior on the connectivity, so you can have connectivity if you want, specific connectivity, but the idea is that you don't need to do this. Reservoir computing is working even if you don't have specific connectivity inside. Okay, and so just to show some a bit how does it work. The idea is that it works as a temporal supervector machine, so it's SVM, and the idea so you have, for example, here in the input space you have a low dimensional space where you cannot separate these blue dots from these red dots with a line. And so what you do with SVM is that you project it in a higher dimensional space, which enables you to then find a linear hyperplane to separate this data in this higher dimensional space. So the reservoir computing is actually doing the same, but in a temporal fashion. So that's the same idea. Okay, so why this name of reservoir computing? So the reservoir is, as we said, the recurrent part. The readout is the output layer. And so thanks to that you have a lot of recombination inside the recurrent layer, so thanks to the random projection, you're actually doing a lot of recombination, and actually the reservoir is literally the reservoir of calculation, so the reservoir computing, reservoir computation, that are nonlinear. So you have a lot of nonlinear computations, and with the output you're going to decode, to linearly decode, so read out the combinations that are useful for your task. So useful for your task, your problem, it means that finding the right values in output. And so it's only based on this idea that you just select in a pool of computation what you need. Okay, so this is the version of reservoirs that I use, so the eco-state network version, so fine rate, average training rate neurons. It's quite simple neurons, it's the different matrices. And so only, as I said, the W out matrix is trained, and we usually use a hyperbolic tangent for the activation function. And W in and W are kept random. And what is interesting is that you can do offline and online training with a reservoir. So it's interesting because we want our architecture to be incremental. Okay, so reservoir computing allows you to process time series and sequences dynamically. It can be trained to be robust to perturbation and can be trained offline and online. So that's the interesting property for a model. And so the idea is that we want to go towards this, to have these features and to have this full architecture, hierarchical architecture from the environment towards more abstract representation layers. So from understanding to production. Okay, so how are we so far? So now I will show you a bit some of the contributions. So we started to work on this idea. So I will first show you this. So this map is a bit better to show how the contribution collaborate. So first we'll start with this hierarchical task reservoir. So this was done, with Luca Pederli, who was a postdoc 2 years ago. And so for this, we took a complex dataset, the timid dataset. So it's an old dataset with a lot of different American accents. It's difficult because you have a lot of speakers, and each speaker only gives 10 sentences. So it has a lot of variability in the inputs. And what we did is that we did a hierarchical reservoir, starting from the speech processing, from the speech, and represent them as MFCC, so male frequency spectrum coefficients. It's just a way, similar way than Fourier transform. Then the first reservoir is trained from this produce to produce the phoneme. And it's in a supervised way. So from the phoneme, the second one has to produce the words, and the third one from the word has to produce the word category. So once the model is trained, we give it this sentence, for example, don't ask me to carry an only rack like that. And so this is the MFCC components that you can see. Then these are the outputs from the first reservoir, so the phoneme activity. So you can see that some of them are a bit difficult to catch up, and you don't have high activities. Then the second reservoir takes this output of the first one and then produce some words. You can see that actually the activity is much higher. It's and found actually well the sentences. And the last category, you actually see that taking the words for the word category, and you actually see that it's even gained in the higher activity. And what is interesting here is that, for example, you can see that you had an out of vocabulary word here, and you can see that actually this other layer actually retrieved the information that in this context, an out of vocabulary word, so it means a word that was not in the top 50 words of encoding, it actually can retrieve that it's actually an auxiliary. So actually lower layers in a hierarchy, or higher if you talk about in abstraction, they are able to actually correct other errors or ambiguities that previous layers have. And what is interesting is that actually, so I don't show it here because it's too much figures, but actually we can also add another layer from word category to semantic role labeling, and it works also like this. Okay, so to summarize this, we have a model that is able to process a stream of input dynamically and hierarchically to represent all levels of symbol at once. So this means that actually when we are at, for example, a 50 time step, so frames of the MFCC, we actually see that we can represent all the different levels at some point. We don't have to process all the phonemes before taking the words and before taking all the sentences. So we can do it on the fly and any time fashion. So compared to transformers, for example, we have to take the whole sentence before predicting what it wants to predict. Okay, so you have this anytime property that is very interesting especially for brain modeling, and it's robust to noise at different levels of hierarchy. Okay, so now we move from this hierarchical test to the vocal sensorimotor learning. So this was done during the PhD of Silvia Pagliarini, who was co-supervised with Arthur Lebois, and he finished last year. And it was also with the help of Nathan Trouvin, who did the work on this during his master's and engineer with us. Okay, so why are we interested in soundbars? Because actually we made a review on the vocal sensorimotor models, and actually there's a lot of similar things, for example, shown by Kuhl and so on, that there are common parts in the developmental stages of the both birds and babies. So you have first a perceptual part, that is sensorimotor learning, and then you have this babbling period, which is common in songbirds and infants. And so that's why so they both acquire this ability to imitate from their parents. And so that's why we took birth, because it's a simpler model to have a vocal sensorimotor model. So we have this loop with the environment here, and we want to make a minimal complete sensorimotor model to create real qualitative sounds, to really have this real sound, because a lot of models actually just produce formants or whatever, and they don't really produce speech, or sometimes they just they produce also spectrograms, which are actually not sounds because you lack the phase in the spectrogram. So we really want something that actually a bot that could be able to interact with real birds at some point. Okay, and so we also, as there's no, we also want to have a low dimensional motor layer, so it's easier actually to learn, and there's actually some logical evidence that there's this constraint of low dimensional, for example, at least in some birds, to show that you need this low level acoustic representation because there's not so much acoustic features that matters for birds, and even if you have this high dimensional perception. Okay, so this was the data sets on which we trained the SensoriMotor model. So you can see here the mean spectrogram of 16 syllables. You can see that they are quite complex, and actually a lot of them are quite similar. For example, these two are quite similar. It's quite difficult to distinguish them, or like these two are quite different, quite similar. And the model, we have to distinguish them and produce these syllables. So first, what we did is that we created a reservoir. We trained a reservoir to actually categorize these different syllables, and so displays the sensory response function. So we did this with echo-state network. So it's processed frame by frame from MFCCs, and then for each frame it gives a label of the correct syllable of the correct syllable. And actually, yeah, I don't put the detail, but I could talk more about it if you want. We actually compare echo-state network and reservoir, and echo-state network are actually generalized faster than LSTMs for this. And then we use low dimensional GAN. So we created a low dimensional GAN. So what is for this motor control function? So this was to have this from this latent space to produce the sound. And so the idea of a GAN, so we took actually a wave GAN, so to produce real sounds. So a GAN is a network made of two networks, a discriminator, which has to say if the sounds are real or generated, and a network which is called a generator that at the beginning from a latent random space generates sounds. And so these two networks are trained all together in common, and then in the end, the generator is able to generate very good sounds given this latent space. And we took it, we constrained it to be 3-dimensional, and usually it's more like 100. Okay, so now I'm going to do another test. So you're going to try to see which ones are real and which ones are fake generated. So here are the first ones. Can you hear them?
Sorry, what was the question, Xavier?
Here are the second ones. So actually, the way we copied them, the way they are repeated is not relevant. So from the spectrogram, you don't really know, cannot really distinguish them. And actually, the first one were the real ones, and the second one was the generated ones. Well, so what is interesting with this generator of the GAN is that actually we can, while we are varying, for example, one component of this 3-dimensional space, we can actually make some very slight variation between different syllables, and we can have transitions, continuous transition from one syllable to another. And so, for example, here we explore the third variable, so we represent this in the UMAP space, dimensional reduction technique. So the brown one are all the generated ones, and then we generate more thin ones, just a line between this third component, and we see actually what it corresponds to in this space of the all the categorized, so all the colors here are the labels recognized by the reservoir. And X says that it's an ambiguous syllable, so an intermediate, so actually an interpolation syllable. Okay, so we did this low dimensional GAN, and then now we will combine all of this and have this inverse model that should actually connect the perceptual space to the motor space. And so for this, we just wanted to make the simplest hypothesis, so to see if just a simple avian learning mechanism could work. So we just have a simple perceptron, so with one layer of weight, and the change of the weight will correspond to the multiplication of the motor activity and the auditory activity, so the perceptual activity, and given learning rate. So in order to show you how this model learns over time, I will pick one neuron inside the model and actually see how it works, how this neuron learns. So we will do a random exploration here. It will produce real sounds and then activate this neuron and see when we reactivate these neurons, what syllables, what the inverse model has learned. Yeah. Okay, and so this, and we will also look at the low dimensional space. So in the next figure, this low dimensional space will be on the left, and this perceptual space will be on the right. Okay. So the idea here is that we start from the origin, coordinates in the motor space. So here you just see a slice. So there's much more points, and all the points are labeled given the recognized category by the reservoir. So the model starts to learn and produce different kind of syllables. And you can see that during learning, the activations go more and more up. And in the end, it's able to produce this syllable R when we reactivate this R. And so it's not only able to learn this R syllable, but also the different syllables, which are these ones. So actually most of them, and only two of them, are not easily learned, because they are actually, this motor space is a bit intermingled, and you can see that some of them are a bit more difficult to learn just with a simple avian learning. But of course, I guess that a bit more complex algorithm, just a simple reinforcement learning algorithm, could actually learn all the syllables. Okay, so we have a minimal complete SensoriMotor model that learns incrementally, and we use just a simple unsupervised learning rule to learn most syllables. So the SensoriMotor model generates and processes real sounds. So we have this action perception loop with the environment. We have these qualitative sounds and this interaction of noisy and continuous environment, so which makes the model robust. Okay, so now we'll go to this cross-situational learning task. So the idea now is to try to connect part of the architecture to start to ground it. So it's not grounded, but to start to link it to grounded multimodal representations. And so this was work started from master student Alexis Juven and Alexandre Variaja. And it's a work that is continued by Suba Ota in co-supervision with Frédéric Alexandre. And so the idea is to try to see how robots could learn a bit like children with this cross-situational learning. So the idea of cross-situational learning is that, for example, you have several objects that you show to a baby, and you say nipple, and so it doesn't know which one of them is this word nipple is relevant to. And then once you show it several times, the infant can see, okay, that nipple can actually refer to this object in the real world. So the idea is what we did is a bit the same, is actually we we can actually see that we don't want to map words like in other experiments, but we want to map actually full sentences. And so for this, so we will process we give a full sentence to the reservoirs. For example, the cup is on the right, and we will actually simulate a vision. So from a scene, for example, you have a packet of tissue, blue on the right, and a red cup on the left, on the right and on the left for the tissue packet, and we represent them as a simple representation. So, for example, the object one is red on the right and is a cup, and the second object is blue, is on the left, and is a packet of tissues. And so the idea is that we will train the reservoir with processing this sentence with this full scene representation. So actually, it's a kind of noisy supervision, because what you can see is that here you have only two features, the cup and right, here, cup and right. So actually the reservoir should output this cup and right, but not the other features it's trained with. And actually through cross-situational learning, it's actually able quite quickly, in a few hundreds of sentences, with a few hundreds of sentences, to actually learn to represent the correct meaning of the sentence. So to imagine a cup that has no color and which is on the right. So we tested this with different corpora. So we did first a generated corpora, which has ambiguities between middle and center, for example, and polysynous words. And we can see, for example, that this is the activity you saw here. And actually, this activity, you can see that actually, for a blue-orange is on the right and the cup is on the center, you can see that actually orange is recognized here as an object, and orange for the second object is recognized as a color. And actually, if you say orange, orange, the model is able to understand it as color and an object. So it means that even if orange is, if you cannot map only one word to different meaning, if we don't say at any time, we don't give the answer to the model that this precise word is linked to this meaning, it's able to do it from the flow of inputs. And very quickly, without going into the details, but just to show that actually the reservoirs are, also for this task, are learning much faster than the LSTMs. So for example, if we limit here to 1,000 sentences for the training, and we increase the number of objects in the vocabulary, and we can see that the green and the red curves for the reservoir are actually, the error curves are actually growing very slowly, unless and so the equivalent LSTM, so the same number of the trained units for the LSTMs, like the LSTM with 20 units is actually going very high, has an error that is going very high. And actually the other, even if you reduce the number of, we increase the number of LSTM units, it's still difficult for the LSTM to generalize quickly. Okay, so we tested this with different corpora. So with this generated one, with the gold corpora, which is a grounding dataset, a corpus for robots, and this crowdsourced dataset, where you have a robotic arm that makes a movement, and people describe what it did, and actually it can be quite long and complex sentences. And we use actually representation, different kind of representation, one-hot coding, BERT pre-train, and BERT fine-tune on corpora. Okay, so I will not go into the details, but in general, so first the reservoir are most of the time very much faster to train, and they have, depending on the corpora, they have better performance or equivalent performance. Okay, so quick summary on this cross-situational experiment. So we are able to go towards this grounding. So to do not to word to meaning mapping, but to do sentence to meaning mapping. So it's a dynamical model that is able to do this on the flow. it can learn with knowledge-teacher signals, so it's robust with this cross-situational learning that happens incrementally. And it's able to learn synonyms and polysynonyms words. And as I said, reservoirs are most of the time more efficient than LSTMs and generalize faster. Actually, we started, we also have another paper related to this on how the reservoir and LSTM generalize and how to plot this with a UMAP. And it's actually, we have worked on with several embeddings and corpora. So, of course, here I showed that we put this multimodal or this grounding at the last layer. Actually, this should happen actually at different level of the hierarchy. Just for example, to explain the McGurk effect, that when actually you change the if you have an ambiguous sound but you see a ba or pa, then you will change your perception given the lips movements. Okay, and the last work I want to present is the work on the robust working memory mechanism. So that was a work done by Anthony Strock doing 2 years ago when he was a PhD student in a team co-supervised with Nicolas Rougier. And the idea is that we want to extend actually the reservoir mechanism because we will need to have this, to be able to have reservoir mechanism that is able to chunk at different level of hierarchy. Okay, so the idea of modeling working memory and gating mechanism is actually that in working memory models, you have this idea that you, when you open a gate, you encode what the input is. Then when you close the gate, you keep it in memory until you need to retrieve it and use it to make some computation for the output. And so we did this with a reservoir. So the idea is that we have the values, a stream of continuous values coming in, and we have a trigger which says when the gate is open, then the memory, the value actually in input should be copied in the working memory, and then when the gate is closed, the desired value M should be kept as the same. And each time you open, it keeps and stays it. Okay, and so we show that actually the model is able to correctly do the task. But not only, it doesn't work only for this simple task, but we show that the model is robust and that it can work for a variety of tasks with more complex perturbations. So what is interesting from the neuroscience point of view is actually, so you had at the beginning different hypotheses on how do you maintain this working memory with neurons. So actually one hypothesis that you have to have maintained activity inside the brain to do this. And actually we can see that, for example, here in this version, we have so the gray lines are the reservoir activities. So yeah, only 20 units from the 1,000 ones. And the red is the memory. And you can see that it can keep all the time this memory value well. And actually, if you change the distribution of the neurons, you can actually see that we can have a continuity of changes from very dynamic coding and still have this working memory, this value that is kept inside the memory. And this is just by changing the distribution of weights inside the reservoir. And we also show that the model is not tuned to specific hyperparameters, but that it actually works for a lot of different parameters from spectral radius, leak rate, and so on. Okay, so to summarize quickly on this working memory model, we have, it works with various hyperparameters, various tasks. Actually, I didn't say that, but we can train it with only a few training values, like 10 or 15 values is enough to obtain a continuous line attractor encoding. So it's very interesting. And yes, of course, it's able to store continuous values from input stream, so it's dynamic. and it can be trained online or offline, so it can also be incremental. And this gating mechanism actually implements a line attractor, a robust line attractor and we think that this gating mechanism can be extended to a more complex action perception mechanism to embed it in SensoriMotor models. And as I showed you lastly, the model can model different kind of neuronal dynamics. Okay, so we showed this part, and now just to come back on the full idea, we actually got a project, a grant, which is a young researcher grant from the French Research National Agency, which is called Deep Pool, Hierarchical Reservoir to Model Language Processing and Production. And actually, if you're interested, I have a postdoc offer running. And so just to summarize all this work and aim, so to have this neurocomputational model of language processing and production. So we need this hierarchy of symbols at different time scales. We have, so which means that we process stream of input dynamically and robustly. That should be available at any time, so since the beginning of the sequence. It should learn in interaction with the environment, so it should learn incrementally towards developmental stages. So this is what we already have. Perception action, so it's on the way with the SensoriMotor and the symbol emergence as well, and the grounding effect also. And we used Reservoir Computing, so which is working well so far, so we are going to continue using it because it's generic and robust, and we hope that it can be extended to more other mechanisms than gating. And it's also nice in a vertically plausible architecture because it doesn't have strong assumption on the connectivity. And actually, the proposed architecture is generic, so it could be used with a non-linguistic task because it's general enough. So just to come back on this hierarchical action perception mechanism, actually, it's not only a functional way that we need this hierarchical action perception, but actually it's neuroanatomically grounded. So this is the image, for example, from Foster that shows that it actually has connection from different level of hierarchy in perception and motor production between these different areas. So ongoing work is to, for example, to link models and experimental data. So, for example, on fMRI on humans, so to do encoding based on models and to try to encode, to predict the brain fMRI activity during speech hearing or reading processing. And we have also this project on electrophysiology recording in birds. So the idea is that we give back, so this is work with Catherine Denegro and Or Casala. So we record cells inside this SensoriMotor area, the HVC, and we play back song to the bird, its own song, and we do local modifications or global modifications to see how it's changed the encoding in the sequence, trying to seek some kind of syntax encoding of these songs. So for future work, we will explore this action perception mechanism, so including attentional chunking mechanism to explore how symbol could emerge hierarchically. For example, to use reinforcement-based rules to allow also forward and backward flow into the hierarchy. So it means that actually we need this to also model this top-down processes, because so far we have this bottom-up ones, and to have this action perception at each layer, and also to integrate, to ground this model more into human-robot interaction experiment, and to integrate this plausibility check mechanism. So it's here. So the idea of this plausibility check mechanism is that, for example, the model will find some representation of what could the sentence mean, and actually, but maybe some lot of the time it won't be able to actually find all what the words mean, and actually it will ask, or it can rely, be able to rely on to check which representation are actually interesting, to actually find new ones that could be correct. And just to finish with the library, so we have made the last 2 years a big improvement in the Reservoir library. So it's a Python library for reservoir computing. So it has a lot of interesting features. So it's really aimed for reservoir computing, not like other libraries made with PyTorch or TensorFlow. And it's for a different kind of users, from students to researchers to industry. And for example, this is just an example how you create nodes. And for example, this is how you can create an eco-state network with very few lines of code. And you have already implemented a lot of online offline learning mechanism, feedback loop. You can already do very different kind of complex hierarchical models, much more complex than deep recurrent models, deep reservoir models. And you have also a toolbox with different mechanisms like interesting capacity and so on. Also, optimization that is already included inside. And these are new perspective, because we will have an new engineer soon to increase this library. So I want to thank all the members of the Mnemosyne team and all my collaborators. And I thank you. So let me know if you have some questions.
Thank you very much, Xavier, for this wonderful talk. Any questions, anybody? So Xavier, I have a basic question.
I cannot hear anything.
Can you hear now?
I think
So we can hear you actually.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming Professor Xavier, Professor Hinaut has a.
Stop sharing.
Can you hear us? Any one of us?
Okay, it changed.
I think his microphone is probably, I mean, his speaker is probably not working.
So now I hear you again.
You can hear?
Can you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. My question is, so if you compare reservoir computing with brain dynamics, right?
Yes.
In brain, there is always an intrinsic dynamics, whether it is doing some input-output behavior or not. Whereas in a reservoir, there is dynamics only when it is triggered by an input. So you think it is necessary to create a reservoir where there is intrinsic dynamics all the time, or it's not necessary?
So you refer to a specific task here, or?
No, take any task.
Yes.
The way the reservoir is defined is there is activity only when it is triggered by a stimulus. Otherwise, it will just, the transients die out and network becomes silent. Right?
Yes. And so your question.
Whereas in the brain, there is dynamics all the time.
So you can make reservoir with different kind of, it can be input driven or it can be chaotic and generate itself some kind of patterns. So it really depends on what kind of task you're doing.
No,
if
so
it's motor
are
task,
you
I
saying,
would say a chaotic one, it's maybe better.
no, does the reservoir have intrinsic dynamics without any input?
Yeah, if you have, it can have an intrinsic dynamic if you have some kind of chaotic activity inside.
Okay.
So if
can
you
you
have
share some
a high spectral radius, for example.
Can you share some references on that? Because I've never heard of that. Maybe later, not now.
So, for example, the force learning algorithm, that's how it has been shown in the paper. So let me see if I have this. So it's an online learning version, and actually they don't use any input, and they just try to produce some output. So I should have the slide somewhere. Okay. Ah, no.
Okay, yes. Maybe you can share later.
Yeah, I can share it later. I don't have them here, but actually, yeah. But you can, if you just have a reservoir and you create, you have a high gain inside, so a high spectral radius of the matrix, then you can use it to generate patterns, and then actually with the feedback, the net, and after training, the network is not so chaotic anymore. That's how it's trained at the beginning.
So any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, really would like to thank Professor Xavier, for this
So
wonderful
maybe,
talk.
Yeah, so I just have this figure, but it's just when you look at the internal activity and you change the spectral radius. So with the low spectral radius, you really have some slow dynamics. This is some kind of optimal dynamics, and here you can see chaotic dynamics where you really have this saturating activity where for much of the task, if you want to generalize, you won't be, for discrimination, for example, it won't work.
Yes, so how do you make use of it then?
What?
How do you make use of this? If it won't learn for, it can't be used for discrimination, right?
For discrimination, no. No,
then
because
what is it?
For
what is it good
pattern
for?
generation.
For generation, okay.
So for example, if I find it in a few seconds. Okay, I have it. And if I share my screen again. So can you see it?
Yeah.
So the idea, so this is a paper from Susilo and Abbott from 2009. And the idea is that, so you have a reservoir like this, which has no input, it just has an output and feedback, and all the black connections are random, and just the red one are linked, so just the readout weights are trained. And actually, that's how they train the system. So actually, you see that at the beginning, they have chaotic, they put a high gain inside the reservoir, the recurrent weight. So you have a lot of dynamics change inside the input, inside the reservoir activity. So, and this is the red part is the output, and the blue part are internal dynamics. So you can see it's chaotic. And then in the second phase, they learn it. And so they oblige the system to have this pattern, which is also fed back in output. And you can see here the derivative of the way it changes over time. And you can see here the dynamics that change also. And in the end, the network is, when the learning is stopped, you can see that actually it can reproduce the pattern, and the dynamics were tailed in this way. And they can not only do this kind of activity, but also much more complex dynamics like this.
Okay. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So let us catch up again. Lots of interesting points in your talk, but let us catch up again and we can discuss further.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, and have a